Billy Hill, the boss of Britain's underworld. London, May 21, 1952. 4:20 a.m. A post office van turns down East Castle Street, just off Oxford Street. The driver doesn't notice the car that pulls slowly from a side alley. He doesn't see the second vehicle closing in from behind. Until it's too late. 7 masked men emerge. The van is boxed in. The driver and 2 attendants are dragged from the cab, beaten with cautious. The entire operation takes 4 minutes. When the van is found abandoned near Regent's Park an hour later, 18 mailbags are missing. Value: £287,000, equivalent to over £10 million today. The police know who planned it, but they can't prove it, because the man behind it never touched the van, never held a weapon, never left a fingerprint. His name was Billy Hill, and for 3 decades, he was the most powerful criminal in London, a gangster who turned crime into a business, violence into strategy, and the underworld into an empire. This is the story of the man the Kray Twins called their mentor, the man who built the template for modern organized crime in Britain, the boss of Britain's underworld. Act 1. Origins: The Making of a Gangster. St. Pancras, London, December 13, 1911. William Charles Hill was born into a family of 16 children, the son of an Irish mother and a father already embedded in London's criminal networks. The Hill household in St. Pancras wasn't just poor, it was a training ground. While other children played hopscotch in the streets, Billy Hill learned a different game: survival through crime. His first arrest came at age 12 for pickpocketing. His first stabbing? 14 years old. A dispute over territory. A knife pulled from his pocket. A rival's face carved open. It was a lesson Hill would never forget. Violence, applied precisely, was currency. By the late 1920s, Hill had graduated from street theft to house burglary. But he wasn't just another thief breaking windows in the night. He was studying, observing how the system worked, who paid off the police, which fences moved stolen goods fastest. In 1934, Hill married Agnes Kirkwood. The wedding photos show a sharp-dressed young man with slick-back hair and dead eyes. He looked like he belonged in a boardroom. He belonged in the shadows. The 1930s transformed Hill from a burglar into an entrepreneur. He specialized in smash and grab, raids targeting furriers and jewelers, coordinated attacks where stolen goods could be moved immediately, speed, precision, no witnesses. A detective who arrested Hill in 1936 wrote in his report, "Intelligent, cunning, and utterly without remorse." Hill served 6 months. When he emerged, he had made contacts inside that would serve him for decades. Corrupt guards, fellow criminals, men who understood that loyalty was negotiable. The stage was set, but it took a world war to make Billy Hill a king. Act 2. Wartime Empire, Blood, Blackouts, and Business. London, September 1940. The Blitz. While Britain fought for survival, Billy Hill saw opportunity. Food was rationed. Petrol was scarce. Identity documents were essential for movement. And Hill moved into the black market, specializing in foods and petrol. But he didn't just sell goods. He sold freedom. Hill supplied forged documents for deserting servicemen, men who fled the front lines, who needed new identities to disappear into civilian life. He charged them everything they had. And if they couldn't pay, they worked for him. The black market made Hill rich. But wealth wasn't enough. He wanted control. In the West End, London's entertainment district, where nightclubs and gambling dens flourished despite the bombing, Hill established protection rackets. Business owners paid weekly fees to ensure their establishments remained undamaged. It was during this period that Hill partnered with another rising criminal, Jacob Colmore, better known as Jack Spot Comer. Spot controlled the East End. Hill dominated the West End. Together, they formed an alliance that would define London's underworld for the next decade. But alliances in the criminal world are temporary, and Billy Hill was already planning his next move. By 1945, as victory celebrations filled the streets, Hill had transformed from a wartime opportunist into London's most connected criminal. He had cash. He had corrupt police on his payroll. He had muscle. He had everything except a crown. So he took one. Act 3. The heists, the art of the project crime. The East Castle Street robbery wasn't just a theft. It was a revolution. Before 1952, British crime was brutal and chaotic. Smash a window, grab what you can, run. Hill changed the game. He introduced what police would call project crime, carefully planned and executed operations. The East Castle Street job took 6 months to plan. Hill's gang studied the mail van's route for weeks. They noted the exact timing of deliveries, the shift changes of guards, the blind spots and surveillance. When roadworks diverted the van's usual path, Hill adapted the plan within days. The gang included insiders, postal workers who provided intelligence. They knew which van carried cash. They knew the alarm system had been tampered with. They knew the keys would be left on the passenger seat instead of with the guard. Recently discovered recordings from gang member Sonny Sullivan revealed a meticulous detail. The getaway cars were positioned at multiple exits, rehearsals were conducted under the guise of filming a crime movie, and Hill waited patiently for the perfect target carrying cash. When the van turned down East Castle Street at 4:20 a.m. on May 21, 1952, the robbery took exactly 4 minutes. No shots fired. No one killed. £287,000 stolen. The money was never recovered. No one was ever charged. 2 years later, Hill orchestrated another spectacular theft, a £40,000 bullion heist from a KLM aircraft. Again, meticulous planning. Again, no arrests. Hill's genius wasn't in the violence, it was in the management. He ran criminal operations like a CEO ran a corporation. Detailed planning, specialized teams, diversified revenue streams. He took a percentage from every job he planned, keeping his hands clean while his bank accounts grew. A 1955 Scotland Yard report described Hill as the most dangerous criminal in Britain, not because of his violence, but because of his intelligence. They had no idea how right they were. Act 4. Alliances and intersections. The criminal chessboard. By the early 1950s, Billy Hill sat at the center of London's criminal web. His influence touched every major operation. His approval was needed for any significant job. And younger criminals sought his blessing like knights seeking a king's favor. Among those young criminals, Ronnie and Reggie Kray, whom Hill mentored in their early careers. The twins were everything Hill wasn't: flashy, violent, desperate for publicity. But Hill saw potential. He taught them the fundamentals: how to structure protection rackets, how to launder money, how to keep police paid and witnesses silent. Reggie Kray would later say, "When I was in my early 20s, the man I wanted to emulate most of all was the former gang boss of London's Underworld, Billy Hill. The prime reason for my admiration was that apart from Billy being very physical and violent when necessary, he had a good, quick-thinking brain." Hill maintained relationships with other major players too. The Sabini brothers, who controlled racecourse betting in the 1920s and 30s, had paved the way for Hill's generation. He studied their methods, improved upon their mistakes. The Richardson Gang, rising in South London during the 1950s, maintained a wary respect for Hill. They operated torture rackets and fraud, brutal but effective. Hill kept his distance, recognizing that their methods attracted too much police attention. But the most important relationship, and the most volatile, was with his former partner Jack Spot. By 1955, their alliance was fracturing. Spot resented Hill's growing power. Hill saw Spot as a relic. The press, feeding on the tension, dubbed them Kings of the Underworld. But there can only be one king, and Hill was already sharpening his knives. Act 5. Gang Wars. The Battle for London. The war between Billy Hill and Jack Spot wasn't fought in shadows. It was fought in newspapers. Hill understood something Spot didn't. Public perception was power. So he weaponized the media. Hill directed crime journalist Duncan Webb of the Sunday People to publish exposés in 1954 that portrayed Spot as a declining figure unfit for leadership. The articles painted Spot as weak, past his prime, losing control. Spot responded the only way he knew how, with violence. There were fights in Soho, knives drawn outside Bar Italia. Blood on Frith Street. Spot was arrested, then released. The police knew what was coming but couldn't stop it. In Hill's 1955 memoir Boss of Britain's Underworld, he described his signature method. I was always careful to draw my knife down on the face, never across or upwards. Always down, so that if the knife slips, you don't cut an artery. After all, chiving is chiving, but cutting an artery is usually murder. Only mugs do murder. Strategic violence. Calculated brutality. Hill carved V for victory, symbols into rivals' faces, a signature, a warning, a message that couldn't be ignored. May 1956. Cabell Street, Edgware Road. Jack Spot and his wife Rita were attacked outside their home by Hill's bodyguard, Mad Frankie Fraser, Bobby Warren, and at least half a dozen other men. The assault was savage. Knives, a butcher's cleaver, relentless stabbing. Spot's face was slashed open. His wife fought back, suffering her own injuries. The attack left Spot hospitalized for weeks. Fraser and Warren were each sentenced to 7 years in prison for the assault. But the message was delivered. Challenge Billy Hill, and you'll be destroyed. Spot, broken and defeated, retired from organized crime. He would spend his remaining years running an antique shop, a shadow of the king he once claimed to be. Hill had one. London was his. But victory brought scrutiny. In late 1956, Home Secretary Gwilym Lloyd George authorized the tapping of Hill's phone. When this surveillance was revealed to Parliament in 1957, it sparked a political scandal about police overreach. Hill realized something crucial. Absolute power attracts absolute attention. It was time to evolve. Act 6. Wartime Lessons, Peacetime Prophets, The Elder Statesman. By the late 1950s, Billy Hill was stepping back from street-level operations. He had served his last prison sentence in the late 1940s. He was determined never to return. So he became what modern criminals would call a consultant, advising on jobs, taking percentages, keeping his hands clean. His most audacious scheme came in the 1960s, when he partnered with John Aspinall, owner of the exclusive Claremont Club in Berkeley Square. Hill and Aspinall orchestrated a sophisticated cheating operation at the card tables, defrauding Britain's wealthiest elite of millions of pounds through a scam known as the Big Edge. The method was elegant. Low cards were slightly bent across their width in a small mangle before being repackaged, while high cards were bent lengthwise. The cards were sealed in cellophane, appearing pristine and untampered. Hill's card sharks, often out-of-work actors, were introduced to the tables by Aspinall and could read whether a card was high, low, or an unbid zero card, 10 to king, gaining a 60 to 40 advantage. On the first night, £14,000 in tax-free winnings. Over 2 years, the operation netted millions. The 18th Earl of Derby lost £40,000 in one night. Family fortunes evaporated across card tables, while aristocrats believed they were playing fair games. When John Burke, the club's financial director, quit in late 1965 after being tipped off about an investigation. Aspinall decided to end the scam. Hill, showing the pragmatism that defined his career, agreed. The partnership dissolved. No charges were ever filed. Hill diversified into legitimate businesses, property development, nightclubs in Morocco. He bought the biggest nightclub in Tangier, Chichel's, for his common-law wife Gypsy Riley, who ran it from 1966 until the mid-1970s. But his influence on the next generation remained. When the Kray Twins rose to power in the 1960s, they did so using Hill's blueprint: organized protection, diversified revenue, controlled violence. Hill had become what every criminal dreams of: untouchable. Act 7. Twilight, the fall that wasn't. Billy Hill never had a dramatic fall. He simply faded. There was no final arrest, no courtroom showdown, no prison cell. Hill's genius was knowing when to stop. By the 1970s, he had officially retired. The Krays were behind bars. The Richardson Gang had collapsed. A new generation of criminals, nastier, more violent, less strategic, were taking over. Hill wanted no part of it. He lived comfortably in Bayswater with Gypsy. They adopted Justin, his son, from an affair with dancer Diana Harris, after she died by suicide in 1975. Hill, the man who carved faces and orchestrated robberies, raised a child who would never follow in his footsteps. Justin later recalled, "He was fun, loving, and generous, all the things you wouldn't expect from a man with his past." There was one final attempt to escape Britain entirely. Hill attempted to relocate to Australia, but when his ship docked in Sydney, he was met by Detective Inspector Ray Gunner Kelly, who delivered a stark message: "Step off this ship, and you'll return to London in a coffin." Hill stayed aboard and sailed back to London. He would never leave again. In 1963, Hill had a brush with Hollywood when Mickey Spillane was filming The Girl Hunters in London. When the prop department couldn't find a real M1911 pistol, Hill brought the producers several real pistols to use in the film. It was the kind of moment that defined Hill: dangerous, helpful, always with connections. Billy Hill died from myocarditis at his home in Bayswater on January 1, 1984, age 72. His death certificate listed his occupation as demolition. Even in death, Billy Hill was telling jokes. Act 8. Legacy, the blueprint. Billy Hill isn't famous like the Krays. He isn't romanticized like Jack the Ripper. He isn't mythologized in films and television shows. But his legacy is everywhere. The East Castle Street robbery heralded the start of Project Crime, carefully planned and executed operations. Every major heist that followed, including the Great Train robbery in 1963, used Hill's template: intelligence gathering, inside men, meticulous timing, clean getaways. Hill proved that criminals could operate like businesses, with hierarchies, specialization, long-term planning. He showed that violence, while sometimes necessary, was a tool to be used sparingly and strategically. He mentored the Krays, advised countless others, and built networks that outlasted his active career by decades. Reggie Kray later stated, "He stands alone, and there will never be another Billy Hill." Mad Frankie Fraser, Hill's enforcer, said simply, "Bill had a great brain. There's no two ways about it." But perhaps the most revealing assessment came from Jack Spot himself, Hill's former partner and eventual enemy, who admitted, "I made Billy Hill. Then he got over the top of me. I should have shot." The sentence trails off. Even Spot knew that killing Billy Hill would have changed nothing. The system Hill built, the network, the methods, the philosophy, had already infected London's underworld like a virus. Today, when organized crime groups operate across international borders, when criminals use corporate structures to hide illegal activities, When violence is calculated rather than chaotic, that's Billy Hill's legacy. He transformed British organized crime from street thuggery into sophisticated enterprise. He proved that the most dangerous criminal isn't the most violent one, it's the smartest one. And here's the final, uncomfortable truth: Billy Hill won. He died free, wealthy, surrounded by family. He never served a long prison sentence. He was never convicted for his most profitable crimes. The system he cheated, the police he bribed, the criminals he mentored, none of them could stop him. The 40 Elephants built an empire of invisible women who stole from the rich. Billy Hill built an empire of organized men who robbed everyone. Both succeeded because they understood the same principle: the greatest criminals aren't the ones who get caught. In the archives of the Metropolitan Police, there's a file labeled Hill, William Charles, 1911 to 1984. It's over 3,000 pages long. Detectives spent 40 years documenting his crimes, tracking his movements, building cases they could never prove. One detective wrote in the margin of a 1959 report, "We know what he did. We know how he did it, but we'll never prove it. He's too clever. He's always been too clever." Billy Hill died on New Year's Day, 1984. The file remains open. The boss of Britain's underworld had the last laugh.